medical billers get
reclaiming my time, thank you. My time has now expired. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Director Chopra, I commend you for your decision to propose the exclusion of medical debt from credit reporting. Medical debt is often the consequence of the unforeseeable, and therefore it reveals next to nothing about the underlying creditworthiness of an individual borrower. America's conventional credit scoring methodology, to me, is fundamentally obsolete. Not only does it include factors that have no informative value, like medical debt, it often excludes factors that have informative value, like rental payments. If credit reporting were to factor in alternative data like rent payments, most of the population, if not all, almost all of it, would become credit scorable. If GSEs like the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York, Freddie Mae, and Fannie Mac were to use credit scores that include rent payments and exclude medical debt, as required by law, millions of more Americans would have access to home ownership. 20,000 of my constituents in the Bronx and New York 15 would have access to home ownership. So for me, the single greatest solution to systemic racism in America is the creation of black and brown wealth through expanded access to credit and expanded access to home ownership. For the lowest income communities of color, there's nothing comparable to home ownership as a tool for broad-based wealth creation. I appreciate your mention earlier of trigger leads. I have serious concerns that unregulated trigger leads fundamentally undermine consumer protection and data privacy. When consumers apply for a mortgage, a credit reporting agency will often sell their private information without their knowledge and consent. Within hours of applying for a mortgage, consumers are often blindsided by a bombardment of telemarketing calls. Some of the lenders behind these calls are often bottom feeders, engaging in unfair and deceptive business practices. And so I worry that poorly regulated trigger leads are often an open invitation to predatory lending against unsuspecting borrowers. I'm curious, would you support legislation that would regulate trigger leads?
Yeah, I really have concerns about the big credit reporting conglomerates making money off of this, especially when we don't even know if these offers are really competitive or legitimate. You mentioned, Congressman Torres, that they might be bottom feeders. We don't even hear that much that these leads are leading to more competition, right. But I really do. I've talked to you and Congressman Rose about it. I think this is a key privacy issue we should work on.
Look, I feel deregulated trigger leads leads to predatory lending under the guise of choice and competition. Maybe the theory is that it will lead to more choice and competition, but the reality is that it's led to more exploitation. As you know, June is Pride Month, and so I have a few questions in the spirit of Pride Month. The Urban Institute released a report finding a 20% home ownership gap based on sexual orientation and gender identity. 5% of the 20% home ownership gap cannot be explained by existing data. And so as the administrator of the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, CFPB is in a position to mandate the disclosure of more data so that researchers like the Urban Institute can ascertain the causes of the unexplained 5% home ownership gap. Is the CFPB willing to take action to expand the scope of the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act to include data relating to sexual orientation and gender identity?
Yeah, we're thinking of looking more deeply in general at the homeownership gap in older homeowners, and there's certainly issues when it comes to sexual orientation and other factors. With respect to Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, there's a number of issues that we are looking at for modernization of that, and that is certainly one of them. I think it's not slated in the very near term, but when we do an assessment and we look at it, I think that's going to be something that we will also have to comply with Supreme Court precedent on this.
The CFPB administers not only the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, but also the Consumer Complaints Database, which is an abundant source of data. Is the CFPB willing to expand the scope of the Consumer Complaint Database intake form to include sexual orientation and gender identity?
We may have done some consumer testing on different identification factors. I think there's always the balance of how to get people through and file, but I'm happy to ask the staff about whether that's been done before.
And just a final question on medical debt. Even if there's a process for disputing, don't you think we should get it right the first time?
Yeah, and often when people dispute, the immediate answer is that it's correct without showing any receipts.
But we should strive for maximum accuracy at the very beginning of the process.
Actually, it's the law for those credit reporting conglomerates to have reasonable procedures to, quote, assure maximum possible accuracy.
I think my time has expired.
Thank you. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Dollins, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Director Chopra, welcome back. Question. So the CFPB referred